You are present at the very last event of the November part of the Spring Rights Literary Festival, which was meant to take place in May and is now taking place in November. If I have a little trouble speaking, it's because I burned a veggie burger and my room is filled with smoke. And the fire alarms went off right before I started this call. I'd like you to know that there are more Spring Rights events from December through March. There are 8 more writing workshops that are free and on Zoom. And all of that information is also on springrights.org. Spring Rights is just one of the many programs and services of the Community Arts Partnership. I'm not sure I introduced myself. I don't remember. If I didn't, I'm doing it again. Robin Schwartz, Program Director and Grant Director of the Community Arts Partnership. We've got other programs, we've got a lot of grants, we've got networking events, we've got the workshops. So I'm going to put our website address up in chat if anybody wants to check it out. I also want to put in a little plug for Capapalooza. Our annual fundraiser is an event where community members donate work that's been in their closets, they're downsizing, they inherited it, belongs to a spouse and you never liked it. That's the kind of stuff we collected. And then we sell it next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. All that information is also on our website. And we also have first Saturday on the Art Trail this Saturday, where 7 people are opening their studios to you. Thanking our Spring Rights sponsors, Ithaca College, Wegmans, M&T Bank, the Odyssey Bookstore, and the Ithaca Marriott. We also have funds from the New York State Council on the Arts and Poets and Writers. I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I'll tell you what chat is if you don't know, with a link to donate to the Community Arts Partnership. This is a free event, and I didn't even want to do a suggested donation. But of course, we need money. So if you'd like to donate to the Community Arts Partnership's annual fund, any amount is amazing. I will put that link up. You will be on mute throughout this event, and you will not be able to take yourself off mute unless you're one of the theater troupe. Use the chat function to communicate. You could talk to everyone, or you could talk to just one person. You could put in comments, you can put in questions. It's just, it is the way that we communicate during these Zoom calls. So have fun, enjoy, and I'm now going to turn the program over to Sue Perlgott.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I see so many friends and relatives. We have London on the Zoom. We have Seattle on the Zoom. We have Ithaca on the Zoom. We have my granddaughter on the Zoom. So it's very exciting. Anyway, now I should read you my little speech, which I will. Okay, so hi. And welcome to the Spring Rights performance of the Senior Troupe of Lifelong. I'm Sue Perlgott. I'm the director and sometimes performer with the troupe. I'm also the filmmaker for the troupe in these pandemic times. Thank you, CAP, for having this event virtually and in the fall, and thank you, Lifelong, for all your support. Before I talk more about the troupe, I would like to introduce the troupe to you. So you can see their names. You know, when we perform live, I'm always introducing the troupe, and then I have this moment of panic that I'm going to forget their names. Like I'm going to point to somebody and go, but now I don't have to panic because you're all named. So you're just going to wave. Carol Santucci, member of the troupe, Deirdre Silverman, Mark Silverman, Emily Johnson, and Michael Schaff. We have one member of the troupe who's not on, that's Jean Senekis. So these are the 5 people. You're going to see 6 people in this performance. I lost my speech. There it is. Okay, so the Senior Troupe of Lifelong presents Living History Theater, which for this evening features the theme of movies. We've been performing Living History Theater for more than 21 years. We feature stories from the troupe's lives that are both humorous and serious, and our Living History Theater is presented as choral theater with both soloists and a choir, and usually in person. But this evening, you'll be watching a video of the troupe telling their stories about movies with fun clips of these movies. Because of the pandemic, I taped the troop members outside this summer. So, along with their stories, you're going to hear cars, car doors, crickets, one really annoying cricket, airplanes, street noise, and whatever else happened. It's just one of the side effects of doing theater during a pandemic. The stories you're going to hear were written in early 2020 before we knew about the pandemic when we were still meeting live. So what happens is we pick a theme, the troupe pick the theme of movies. We come in with the stories, we read them to each other, and everybody helps collaborate in some ways in making sure the stories are working. So what you're hearing are the stories that we had already collaborated on. We resurrected them for this performance. And then the senior troupe is also supported with a grant from the Community Arts Partnership of Tompkins County. So you're going to watch a video, you're going to watch it on Zoom, although I find that the sound isn't great. Or if you have the technical skills, and don't do this if you don't think you can, in the chat at the very top is the link for the YouTube. You can watch it directly on YouTube. You won't be lost off Zoom because it'll come up on a different browser. And once it's over, you will come back to the talkback. It's about 27 minutes and 4 seconds. And I think, unless I have forgotten something, we are ready to watch this video. Again, the theme is movies. These are stories from the troops' lives. I think you will enjoy, and you will, in fact, probably remember a lot of these yourself. So, anytime, Leah, we're ready to roll.
This is my story about movies. As much as I disdain the glut of technological gadgetry, I embrace the richly evolving business of movie making and movie viewing. Movies have always been and are as much a part of my life as breakfast. In fact, I have nearly as many memories of movie experiences as I do of actual events in my own drab life, some of them with surprises. The first movie I remember my brothers having to drag me to, kicking and screaming, was Phantom of the Opera. I was only 6 years old. The very word phantom filled me with dread. But I sat through the entire film, transfixed in a frozen state of terror. Etched in my brain and memory were the burning acid flung into Claude Rains' face, the spooky white mask he wore afterwards, the ominously trembling drapery behind which he was lurking, and the huge skulking high above the stage on steel gridding, the huge chandelier crashing down on the audience. It was all seared into my memory, such that for years I didn't dare turn my back on a closed door or heavy drapery. Then, deep into my adulthood, the movie was being shown on TV. Oh, I said to myself, I can revisit my childhood experience. I switched on the TV. There came the music, there came Claude Rains and the acid, and there were... Wait a minute, Nelson Eddy crooning to his sweetheart? Where did they come from? As I watched, I saw a whole other story unfolding, a romance that had completely escaped my awareness was embedded in this horror film I thought I remembered so vividly. I felt I was experiencing my child consciousness side by side with my adults, and the child memory had a hole in it. It took me some thinking to realize I clearly had not the receptors to register the romance at the time. It was strange. Now, maybe it was the reality of newsreels punctuated by air raid sirens and blackouts that gave me the impression that when people died in movies, they actually did die. I remember thinking what a waste of human life it was to die for the sake of a movie. I fretted about it. And then one day I saw Robert Cummings, apparently resurrected, in a comedy long after I'd seen him killed in a previous movie. Oh, they're pretending. The coming of age, I guess. But pretending or not, coming home from the movie, The Thing from Another World, I begged my mother to let me sleep with her. I was so terrified. Oh, I've been warmed by love stories. African Queen is my favorite. And shaken by laughter by comedies like Big Deal on Madonna Street. And I've been awed by science fiction. Once in New York City in the mid-70s, I attended a gathering of people, some liberals, who were backing Fred Harris for president. It was, I believe, the apartment of George Peppard. He had in his living room a movie screen and shelves of movies in tins. Oh, I thought it must be wonderful to be able to watch movies whenever you wanted at home. And how I wished I were rich. Now, years later, I have dozens and dozens of videotapes and DVDs in my home, and I can watch my favorites anytime. And I'm not even rich.
I have had 3 significant firsts in my movie-going life. One is crying at a movie, another is going to a movie by myself, and another is crying at a movie that I went to by myself. The first is crying at a movie. It was Shane, and I was about 12 years old and with my mother. Many of you have seen Shane, so you probably already know the scene where I cried, or maybe you all cried too. Shane, a handsome gunslinger, arrives in a small Wyoming town where he becomes a farmhand. He stays for several months, falls in love with the farmer's wife, and develops a strong bond with her 7-year-old son, Joey, who idolizes him. After having his fill of the local roughnecks and not wanting to slide back into his life as a gunslinger, Shane realizes he must leave. While his mother is elsewhere, Joey watches as Shane rides away. The second of my firsts was going to the movies by myself. One day, I was about 20. I was in the mood to go to a movie, but had no one to ask to go with me at the last minute. It didn't occur to me to go by myself, because going to the movies had always been a social occasion, and therefore an enjoyable one. Enjoying something on my own seemed somehow creepy, sort of pathetic, as if I were alone in the world and had no friends. But then I had an idea. Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal was playing, a movie rumored to be hard to understand, and thus more like an intellectual exercise. Now this didn't seem like a movie I'd enjoy, and thus my solution. I could go to a movie, my idea of a social occasion, but if I wasn't going to enjoy it, I could go by myself without feeling alone and pathetic. So I went. The movie was about a man who comes home from the Crusades, which I had only a vague idea of what that was, something to do with religion. He plays a game of chess with death. I didn't know what that was about, and there was a young family involved in some way. And what on earth did the title mean? The Seventh Seal? Well, it definitely was not an enjoyable experience, but it also failed to be an intellectual exercise because I had no idea what was going on. The third of my movie firsts was crying at a movie while by myself. The movie was Death in Venice, about a middle-aged man, Auschenbach, who becomes besotted with a beautiful 14-year-old boy whom he first sees at the beach. As I sit in the audience, it is painfully sad to watch Auschenbach, consumed with his infatuation, follow the boy around town, watching him with his family and friends. Again at the beach, Auschenbach watches as the boy runs out of the water and up the beach, where he is vigorously and lovingly dried off by his mother. As Auschenbach witnesses this scene, which so vividly highlights the gulf between his own adult desire and the boy's extreme youth. He is finally confronted with the hopelessness of his yearning, which has all along created the pathos that runs through the movie. Sunken deep into a beach chair and absorbed in his own tragedy, Auschenbach's head droops to his chest and he dies. I am once again crying at the movies, but this time I'm crying at the movies while I'm all by myself. I am now perfectly comfortable going to the movies by myself and crying at the movies while all by myself.
For years, I kept Alfred LaRue's obituary safely tucked in a book near my computer. I cut it from the Times and kept it close, even as the newsprint faded. At the top of the page was a publicity shot from the 1940s, when a Cajun cowboy called Lash found fame and fortune in Hollywood, starring in a series of one-hour westerns, horse operas. Lash LaRue's world was a land of smoking six-shooters, a sidekick named Fuzzy Q. Jones, and his wonder horse, Black Diamond. Other cowboys might dress in black and fight the bad guys to save the homesteaders, defy ranchers and sheep herders, or stall the encroachment of the railroad. But no one else could take down a bad guy and crash through doors without messing his hair. At the climax of a story, Lash's whip would take on a life of its own, wrapped around some hapless villain. I knew he didn't use a stuntman. He was the one who cracked the whip. When I was 9 years old, I had a dream. I'm out west, where the buffalo roam. A cowboy pushes through the swinging doors of a saloon. I watch him in the mirror above the bar. It's Lash LaRue. He slipped out of one of his movies and is sitting on the stool next to me. He's all in black, big hat, pointy boots, a whip on his hip. He sips a beer and looks me over. He says, "What are you doing here, kid?" Before I can say a word, Lash reaches out, grabs my shoulders, and pulls me close. Lash became my obsession, a friend who helped me figure out the world, especially my parents and teachers. If Lash wandered off, he always managed to turn up in time to do something that got me into trouble. That didn't matter, because my imaginary friend made me feel real, as if I mattered. The first time was in the 3rd grade, after my teacher, Mrs. Shapiro, awarded me a pencil for good behavior. Then Lash appeared next to me and sent me up to her desk, where I snapped the pencil in front of her nose, tossing the pieces in the wastebasket. He grinned and slapped his side as I walked back to my seat, while the other kids sat wide-eyed. Of course, Lash came along when Mrs. Shapiro sent me to the principal's office. At Hebrew school, Lash would mess with the blackboard chalk, knock it onto the floor over and over till it drove Mr. Friedman crazy. When I didn't stop laughing, I was banished for a week. At the movies, Lash sat next to me cheering for the good guys. When I took the Flatbush bus to the beach at Reese Park, he danced on the lifeguard's chair. And at the library on Avenue J, he made faces across from me while I read Horatio Hornblower books. Once, he started a fire at my house. I got a lecture from a tall fireman and had to sleep in the smoky room. That was not fun. Lash was gone before I got to college, but he returned for one last appearance. I was living on an NYU campus in the Bronx. During my senior year, my uncle found a car for me, a dark green 1949 convertible with skirts. At the end of the day of classes, I'd pull my friend Dave from across the hall, and we'd cruise Fordham Road in my cream puff. Dave's girlfriend often joined us. The three of us jammed on the bench front seat of the Plymouth. One day, Lash came out of retirement and camped in the back seat. He shook his whip at me. "Do something, man." "What do you mean?" He poked me in the back. "Do what I'm telling you right now." I eyed the young woman next to me and felt a tingling in my groin. At the next left turn, when we all leaned in, I let my elbow accidentally flick her breast. Dave was on the outside, so he didn't see. In the back seat, Lash erupted, pounding his fist. Yes, you got her." He was right, because after a couple of rides with my wandering elbow, she decided to ditch Dave. That's how Deirdre and I got together. And 55 years later, we're still a couple. You can check out Lash's films on Netflix. Lash looks spindly with a thin Bogart voice. But back in the 50s, he was my hero.
Home movies were all the rage when I was growing up in the 30s and 40s. My parents used a 16mm camera to film the four of us taking our first steps, learning to ride a bike, or just horsing around in the backyard. But the majority of our movies were of vacations in Door County, Wisconsin, or a dude ranch in Montana. There's my brother lifting a sheet of ice from a trout stream and breaking it into a million pieces. And here comes Mom holding onto her big straw hat as she speeds in a boat across the waters of Lake Michigan. And oh, there's our whole family, except for Dad, who's holding the camera, lined up along the back rail of the open caboose of the Union Pacific Railroad train we took to Montana every summer. Watching home movies was quite a production. The heavy projector was hoisted onto a sturdy table and a portable screen set up in the living room. Dad threaded the machine and fitted in the edges of the film into the projector's sprockets. The drapes were drawn, the projector was turned on, and suddenly our family's memories sprang to life on the screen. We all seemed to wobble a bit, as if we were slightly drunk. Our mouths opened and closed as we talked and laughed, but no sound came out. We stuck our tongues out at the camera. We made goofy faces. We pointed at things to make sure they'd be noticed. My father's fish he'd get caught. The blue ribbon my sister had won at the horse show. The space in my mouth where a tooth had come out. Sometimes the film would catch, and movement on the screen would stop abruptly. If Dad didn't act fast, the projector's light would burn a hole in the film, and we'd watch in dismay as the image disappeared into a halo of bright light. Then we'd have to wait patiently for him to rethread the machine so we could continue watching. I always knew the end of a movie was imminent when those big white circles appeared, and then the thwap, thwap, thwap of the film as it wound down and came to a stop. Home movies were great, but Hollywood movies were even better. The Stadium Theater was an easy walk from my house, and I often watched the double feature on Saturday morning with my friends. After seeing movies like Lassie Come Home, National Velvet, or Little Women,
The velvet is for Velvet Brown, shy and unassuming.
I would float home with my head in the clouds, because I didn't just watch those heart-wrenching, drama-filled movies. I lived them. My friends and I would act out the stories afterward in the big attic in my house, donning costumes from the costume chest. My favorite movie stars were all close to my own age. Elizabeth Taylor, Judy Garland, Peggy Ann Garner, and Natalie Wood. But the one I worshipped the most was Margaret O'Brien. Oh, if only I could be a movie star like her. I loved her big soulful eyes, her pouty mouth, the dimples in her cheeks, and more than anything, her whispery voice. I would lock myself in the upstairs bathroom, sit on the sink where I could see myself in the mirror, and practice crying those big crocodile tears that Margaret seemed able to produce on cue. I'd pooch up my lips and talk to myself in her whispery voice. "Oh, mister, please don't hurt that little dog. I'm still in love with the movies, and after seeing one that truly affects me, I still float home as if feeling I have been transported to another world.
When I was in high school, living in Nyack, New York, I had a part-time job working at the local movie theater, the Rockland Theater, selling tickets and working the concession stand where I sold popcorn, soda, candy, and the like. One time, when I was selling popcorn to a customer, Jerry Lewis walked in the door, presumably to promote his new movie, Rockabye Baby. When I came home, I told my family that I had seen Jerry Lewis, and they were jealous. Also, while I was in high school one day, I happened to look out of the back window of our house and saw Gregory Peck, who was talking to our neighbor Horton Foote. Horton Foote was writing the screenplay to Killing a Mockingbird, which is still relevant today, racially speaking.
I'm simply defending Tom Robinson. There's been some talk that I shouldn't do much about defending this man.
I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. When I graduated from university, I learned from my mother, who had a friend on the draft board that was about to be drafted into the Army. That was the time of the Vietnam War. During college, I had protested against the Vietnam War, and I was to be drafted. I didn't want to go into the Army, and I was not prepared to do what a high school friend of mine did, which was move to Canada to avoid the draft. So I signed up to be a naval officer, which required that I go to naval officer school for 3 months in Newport, Rhode Island. Then I was sent to Long Beach, California to join the USS Princeton, an amphibious helicopter ship. I was then designated as the main engine room officer, where I was in charge of 160 men, the largest division on the ship. Over 3 years, I spent several cruises overseas. On our second cruise, while sailing up and down the Vietnam coast, one night after standing my watch, much to our surprise, the officers of the Princeton were able to see an amazing anti-war movie, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. One of the many themes of the movies was that the Russians were poisoning our precious bodily fluids. This was the time when many people on the right and left were protesting fluoridation being added to our drinking water to protect our teeth. Toward the end of the movie, one of the planes depicted in the movie purposely lost communication with the main Air Force headquarters as it was heading to the Soviet Union, where it was scheduled to drop a nuclear bomb. One of the last scenes of the movie, one of the crew members hopped on the bomb that was being dropped to the land below, rode it like a cowboy, and was heading down. It was both a thrilling and terrifying scene. Peter Sellers was the star of the movie and was brilliant in all 3 parts he played. To see an anti-war movie aboard a ship while cruising down the Vietnam coast was fascinating and amazing, and secretly gave my anti-war feelings a boost.
In my hometown, there was only one place to see movies, the Fantasy. Can you think of a better name for a movie theater? When it was being built in the early 30s, the owners held a contest to choose the name. The teenager, Frida Robbins, won the contest. In addition to bragging rights, she got a lifetime free pass to the theater. Frida always said she could never move away because who could give up free movies? My friends and I went to the Fantasy most Saturdays without parents. There was usually a double feature, plus coming attractions and cartoons. The kids' matinees had matrons who were, well, matronly. They wore white uniforms, sensible shoes, and marched up and down the aisles, monitoring our behavior. No feet up on the seats, no throwing popcorn, no making noise. Are you kidding me? A theater full of kids and we were supposed to keep quiet? We hated the matrons and found ways to harass them, pelting them with popcorn and squirting them with water pistols when their backs were turned. Once we even put ink in the water pistols to stain their uniforms. Looking back on it now, I see a bunch of privileged kids tormenting women who must have needed the work and were just trying to do their jobs. But back then, it was all part of going to the movies. My parents started taking me to Broadway shows when I was 9, but Broadway couldn't compete with the fantasy. The luscious, saturated Technicolor, big CinemaScope vistas, and close-ups of the actors all heightened the movie magic. By 6th grade, I wanted to start seeing serious movies, not just the children's matinees. I had a major blow-up with my parents because they wouldn't let me see The Man with the Golden Arm. In which Frank Sinatra goes through a harrowing withdrawal from heroin addiction. I saw the film years later and realized my parents were right, but at the time I hated them for their censorship. There was a bigger censorship issue at the Fantasy. The Catholic Church had enormous influence in my hometown, and for decades they dictated which movies could be shown and which could not. But as time went on, the Fantasy was losing customers to nearby theaters that weren't constrained by the church's rigidity. The big breakthrough came in 1961 when the Fantasy defied the church by showing La Dolce Vita, a 3-hour Fellini film that included drugs, lots of sex, and a larger-than-life Anita Ekberg who blew adolescent minds. After that, there was no going back. In the evenings, the Fantasy had ushers who dressed in fancy uniforms, although they were mostly just college kids. The ushers helped people find seats in the dark and quieted rowdy teenagers. By high school, the balcony became the most important part of the theater as the makeout spot that merged film fantasies with teenage romance. What was it about the balcony that made it so sexual? It wasn't any darker than the rest of the Fantasy, but adults rarely sat there, and the ushers only intervened when clothes started coming off. Monday morning gossip at school was often about who did what to whom in the balcony. I left for college and my parents moved away, so it's more than 50 years since I've been at the Fantasy. It's still there in the same location, though now it's an AMC multiplex with 5 screens. And despite all the technological innovations we now have, I still miss those big screen fantasies of my youth.
So here we are with the troupe. I'd love it if you want to put some questions in the chat since you can't talk. We're not letting you speak. But meanwhile, I've got a couple of questions we could start with for the troupe. So, what? Well, what? uh, Okay, so what do you like most about being in the troupe? So you have to unmute yourselves, troupe. You can unmute yourselves. Okay? So, what is it you like the most about being in the troupe? What is it that you enjoy the most when we're live? This is unusual, people. This film had to be made because we couldn't do a live performance, but this group has participated in many, many, many live performances. So, anyway, what is it about the troupe that you like? And
I love talking about myself, and I always like hearing other people's experiences, even when they're very different or when they're very similar to mine. I just love hearing everybody's stories, including my own.
Well, even more than the performances, I enjoy the meetings themselves because we have so much fun and just bantering back and forth, and we're like a bunch of kids, really.
I can attest to that. Sometimes I feel like I'm herding cats or I'm herding third graders. We do have a lot of fun in rehearsal. We laugh a lot. We make we really like each other a lot, so it's okay. We can say things to each other. Um, so
Well, I think what I like best, which of course we didn't have this time, is the choral part, the group adding to the individual stories that really livens them up.
So what Deirdre is referring to is when we perform live, we sit in chairs, and then on each side of the chairs are stands. Nobody memorizes. Memorizing is out. That doesn't happen when you're a senior. Well, maybe it does for some, but not for us. So we have music stands, and somebody will get up and tell her story or his story, and then the troupe adds in voices, sounds. Sometimes we have visuals. Well, we couldn't do that this year, although I'm trying to come up with a way to do that on Zoom for the spring. So I'm thinking about how we might be able to actually do that together on Zoom. But that's what it's like when it's live, and it's a lot of fun. And we have a lot of fun coming up with what we're going to add to everybody's stories. We make faces, we make sounds. We do a lot of we are good at improvisation, so we improv a lot and then we set it. So all the stories are set, and I'm very rehearse. That's my goal. We do a lot of rehearsal. By the time we perform, stories are pretty good, pretty set, and come off pretty well. So somebody asked, well, we have a message from Mike's daughter and my stepdaughter, who said, "This was wonderful. I can't send a message to everyone for some reason, but I do want to send my appreciation. Love the stories." That's your daughter, Mike. And now we have a question. Could you talk about the evolution of the group, how and why you started? So that would be me. So, well, I've lost track, 20, 21, 22 years ago. I decided I wanted to do some theater from Stories from Our Lives. Back in the 70s, I had started a feminist theater troupe, and we performed Stories from Our Lives. In fact, one of our members is on the call with us here, Roberta. We did Stories from Our Lives for 6 years. We were really, really well received. Well, I'll just have to promote this. I just made a documentary about the troupe. It's called It's All Right to Be Woman Theater. You can Google It's All Right to Be Woman Theater, and you can see the documentary. So I loved that time. I love being in the troupe, and I've always wanted to recreate the troupe. So I thought, well, why don't I recreate telling stories from our lives with seniors? So I got in touch with Lifelong, and I asked them, would it be okay to start a senior theater troupe? And when we started, there were about 6 or 7 members, and I actually tried to recreate the theater group. We did improvisation, we did stories, we ran around the room, and after the first performance, they all turned to me and said, "We're not doing this anymore. We're exhausted. We can't we can't do this kind of theater. It's just way too tiring." So I started to rethink about how we could do theater, how people didn't have to memorize, so they wouldn't have to hold scripts while they were running around and performing. And so this evolved from the troupe, the members of the early troupe saying, "There's no way we're going to be doing this anymore. You got to put us in chairs. We're not doing this." So that's how it evolved. The troupe members have evolved over the years. I don't think there's anyone in the troupe now that was with me at the beginning. But people in the troupe, Carol's been in for a very long time. I think Emily's been back and forth in it for a long time. We love having new members. I will be having virtual classes in February and March. I did put in the link at the top. If you're interested in the virtual classes, if you look at the top of the chat, I have info at closetohomeproductions.com that you can get in touch with me, and I will be happy to put you on the list for the virtual classes in February and March. From there, I'm hoping to come up with a way to work on Zoom to actually do a live performance. I have no idea how that will work or if it will work, but I'm thinking about it. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Um, any other questions? That was a very good question. More questions. Anybody you can ask, you can also ask people in the troupe.
I think you could do a live performance just like you're doing right now. You know, you're all on the screen and you're all on Zoom and there's people looking at you. So this is how you can do.
Well, the thing is that, yeah, the thing is that for the troupe to join in, I think on Zoom it might be hard. And that video, I brought in clips from other movies. I wouldn't be able to probably do that
Oh,
on
right.
Zoom. That just seems a little complicated. But I think, yeah, I think people could read their stories and we could figure out a way to have it be more collaborative and have the troupe do more. It's just a little more work, or we could just do it the way we did it.
But I love what you did with the video. You know, I love the fact that you were able to put film in there. I mean, of
Yeah.
course, this was about movies and you got a chance to put film in there. You know, it was really perfect. And, you know, not everybody who's listening saw those movies, so know what you're talking about when you reference them. But those visuals really were perfect. You know, that was really great.
Yeah, it seemed perfect if we're going to be doing stories about movies that I could make a film. I could make a video. It just seemed like it was the perfect moment to do that. So I'm glad I was able to do that, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And I taped everybody in my backyard. So the cricket really, I tried to get rid of that cricket, but it wouldn't go. So that cricket had a major role.
Sharon Entema wants to know, how'd you get a hold of those old films? Did you just look them it on YouTube or?
Well, I don't tell anybody.
Oh,
I,
don't tell
I,
anyone.
I illegally downloaded them. So, yeah, I mean, actually, when you make actually as a filmmaker, one is allowed to take 3 to 5 seconds of a film if you're using it non-commercially, if you're using it as historical reference, which is all was. So really, I shouldn't get into too much trouble, but I found a software which I could download YouTube videos, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
I ran, I just Googled them and got what I got.
Hey,
Well,
would it be fun if I asked everybody who's on the call to put the first movie they remember seeing in a movie theater into the chat? What's the first movie you remember seeing in a movie theater?
Who can remember?
Well, for me, it was,
Phantom of the
me,
Opera.
it was well, it was Mary Poppins for me. Younger, but just everybody on the call, just type that in.
So Snow White from Deirdre.
Oh, look at all this. We've got Ben-Hur. We've got Snow White, South Pacific, Gone with the Wind. Oh, the Blob. I remember the Blob, Carol. Dr. Dolittle, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah, I was going to say that. Godzilla. Yeah, I used to watch those. But the Blob, man, what was that? Looked like just a big piece of liver or something. Dr. Dr. Dolittle was
Mine
amazing.
was Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
I don't remember actually what my first movie was. So
I just remember all the Disney cartoons
yeah, it was probably a
that were part
cartoon.
of the movie experience when we were
I
young.
do remember seeing Fantasia.
Yes, yes, I do too.
Yeah, that was amazing.
I can't see all the chat. So
We've got Nancy remembers Bambi. Of course, Nancy, that was a traumatic experience for you, I imagine. I mean, Bambi. I won't ruin the plot by telling you what happens. Okay, so we have 10 minutes before our next event. So does anyone have any other questions, or does the troupe want to ask any questions of Sue, or is there anything else you want to talk about? Because Carol, you said you like to talk about yourself.
So yeah, as a troupe, you want to talk about what were some of your favorite themes? Troupe members.
You mean from years past?
Yeah.
I like the one that we did about prejudice.
Oh yeah, that was very good. Yeah. Yeah. When the troupe started, we did very, very light themes. It was just a lot of fun. We did a lot of, it was just light and laughing. And then somebody in the troupe, she's not here anymore. She said, I need to do a story about how my lover broke up with me. Is that okay? And I was like, oh yes, because I don't tell the troupe what stories to write. They pick their own themes. I don't guide them. We do a whole thing where everybody brainstorms and then we vote on them. I don't get to vote. I don't get to pick. So when this troop member said, "Can I talk about my lover breaking up with me when I was 64?" I was thrilled, and from that moment on, when then we started to have a little more intense stories. So we like to have some funny, some intense. We like to have a combination now, and that generally works out. And what works out, what is so fabulous, is that we don't discuss with each other what we're going to write. We just come in with the stories, and they really do mesh. It's been rare where we've said, no, that story is not going to work at all. It's just, they do mesh, and the troupe is very good about allowing us to make comments about their stories to make it more understandable. So,
did you tell people that they can join if they're interested in being on the troupe?
Yes. So the troupe will be doing virtual classes again. We do them on Thursday afternoons from 2 to 3. I'll be starting my next class in February. You can get in touch with Lifelong, although they're not always great with answering your call, or you can email me at info@closetohomeproductions.com. It's in the top of the chat. We like all ages. We're happy to make it intergenerational. In fact, last March, before the pandemic hit, we were working with 2 Ithaca College students who wrote these beautiful stories about home movies also. That was their take on movies. But the pandemic hit and they disappeared from our lives. So, they're fine, but they were no longer working with the troupe. So intergenerational is fine. I found that about 10 people is about as good as you want on a Zoom class. So do get in touch with me if you're interested. Get in touch with Lifelong. They do ask $5 a class, really not that expensive. It also helps to support Lifelong. Lifelong is a senior center in Ithaca. Just in case you didn't know, you can check them out too. They have a lot of really interesting classes and activities, so you can check that out.
And I'm going to plug Sue now. You should check out her website, Close to Home Productions. Sue was someone that applied many, many years ago to do a theater production called 101 Ways to Retire or Not. And when she started work on that, she realized that, wait a minute, this should be a film. And she wasn't a filmmaker at the time. So you worked with a guy named Chris something and put together a film, 101 Ways to Retire or Not, a lot of local interviews. And then can people watch the movie? How do they have to, they could watch the trailer?
Well, so on the website on close to home productions.com, you can watch the trailer. We do have the movie up on video on demand, I think for like $3.99 or something like that. It's still relevant, actually, even though it was made a gazillion years ago. And yeah, that was my start. I fell in love with making films at that point, and that was it. I'm still going, still making films, still happy to be working in film and theater.
Yeah, that's cool. I love it when artists move to different mediums, or like you have this end goal in mind and you have to figure out how to get there. Like, oh, I have to become a filmmaker now in order to do my project. That's like pretty cool. We have now 6 minutes till the next event. I'm going to tell you that if you look at springrights.org, and rights is WRITES, you'll see that there are 8 writing workshops that are happening, and they're free, if I already didn't say that, that are happening from December through March. And I'm going to tell you what they are. I figure me babbling is better than dead space. So the workshops are starting in December. Catherine Mahan is doing a workshop on writing fantasy and science fiction on December 9th. I'm actually looking at the Spring Rights website. From January 14th, which is a Thursday, Dan Rosenberg is doing a workshop called Secret Syllabics. Did I say that right? A poetry workshop for sneaky people. Brenna Fitzgerald, this was the most attended workshop when we did live Spring Rights last year. By the way, they're all virtual. Writing from the Body. She's helping through a series of mindfulness exercises with writing prompts. It was a very cool workshop. Then Thursday, February 4th, Running Around the Writer's Block. That's by Elizabeth Nonas, who's a professor at Ithaca College. Kenneth McLaurin is doing a joke writing workshop. That's the one my husband wants to take. Life's a Joke, Find the Funny. And then on Thursday, March 11th, The Art of Fear, How Our Authors Create Riveting Experiences Through Suspense and Terror, C.W. Breyer. Emily Writes Back, Thursday, March 18th. Emily Sanders Hopkins has an advice column. I think it's fictional advice column. Her workshop is Letting Loose Your Inner Advice Columnist, Essayist. I'm totally taking that. And then lastly, on April 15th, Unstill and Unpresent, Unrestricting the Universe Within, a workshop by Peaches Gillette. Isn't that cool, all the stuff we're doing?
Is. And I just want to thank everybody who came to see the senior troupe. Thank you, family, friends, senior troupe members. We will continue on this journey. And thank you, Robin, for giving us this platform. It's been great.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm seeing clapping. Yay.
Yay.